welcome to the video. Some interesting news recently come out of the 35th conference from the World Triathlon Championship Finals in Abu Dhabi, and essentially this is implicating, particularly there's a few rules, and this is on the back of the news that Ironman will no longer be in Kona for the men in 2023, which has kind of shaken the community up somewhat. But nonetheless, there are rules now regarding the shoes that you can wear in an Ironman event. So we'll have a read through, but get down to the actual crux of, what's going on. So World Triathlon's member national federations came together in person for the first time since 2019 on Sunday as the 35th World Triathlon Congress concluded a spectacular 2022 championship finals in Abu Dhabi. And all these people gathered together, and one of the rules that they kind of came up with is that in place from the 1st of January 2023, so just a short month's time, among the rules that will be implemented for the next season are regulations over the use of running shoes to be adapted to follow the rules implemented by World Athletics. There's also a new maternity policy that will freeze the rankings of athletes from the moment they announce their pregnancy, which I think is fantastic, until the child is 2 years old, to facilitate their return to competition, which will also come into effect. So this particularly, though, from here to here, regarding the actual athletics running shoes, I'm going to skip over the page now to have a talk about exactly what that entails, bringing up the actual World Athletics guidelines, and so what this means for Ironman competitors. But it's off the back of, I guess, quite publicly people talking about, Gustav Eden's running shoes in Kona, and the fact that they were definitely a prototype of those on running shoes, and some speculation again about, there wasn't so much speculation as to whether they were legal or not, because of course they were legal with the guidelines that triathlon currently had. However, now moving into 2023, we see that they, of course, will no longer be able to be used. And there are particular protocols and regulations surrounding the actual shoes that, can be had. And these will be under the World Athletics guidelines. And so before we get into those actual guidelines, I think it's a discussion. I actually want to get people's opinions on this. What do you think? Because we know that with triathlon, obviously, it's very, there's a lot of innovation that drives triathlon, and innovation that doesn't necessarily occur across the individual sports, particularly when we look at cycling. So we know that cycling bikes, the time trial bikes themselves, they don't need to be UCI legal. So the actual geometry of the bikes or the measurements of the riders' setups relative to their saddle height and all that kind of stuff doesn't need to be, or saddle position behind the crank line and all these kinds of things, and the extensions, how long they can be, the time trial bars. There's a lot of innovation that drives triathlon and ultimately drives performance, and running shoes are one of those. And so now essentially we're kind of going back and saying, well, actually, we want to try and make it, I guess, the good thing about this is it's trying to make it overall fairer, so that, professionals who have a whole lot of access to money or access to connections, which can ultimately develop them a faster shoe that no one else is able to use because it's a prototype and it's the first time it's being kind of exposed to the world, or the sporting world, on race day, will no longer be able to happen. And one of the regulations in particular is that the shoe needs to be available for at least a month to purchase by the public from the actual shoe manufacturer. So it really opens up the market and opens up the availability, and means that, we can't have one runner or one racer using a shoe that no one else has ever seen before. So we'll skip across now to the actual World Athletics regulations, and have a little bit more of a deep dive as to what that means for triathletes and Ironman competitors. Alrighty, so this is the athletics shoe regulations, the World Athletics regulations effective from the 1st of January 2022. Now, if we go down, obviously it's a decent sized document and we have all the specific definitions and terminology, but the main thing that affects triathlon, and particularly these prototype shoes, is some of these regulations in here. So one thing to note, of course, though, is that the purpose of these regulations, and I think this is good, establishment of transparent, objective, feasible, and fair set of requirements and procedures, and essentially just making things fair, more accessible, and not giving specific athletes with the available resources an unfair advantage. So all new shoes prior to being worn by an athlete for the first time in an applicable competition must be approved by World Athletics in accordance with the process set out in Appendix A. So we can go down and have a look at all that. And development shoes, they must, of course, the same kind of thing applies. Appendix 1, I should have said, and Appendix 2, if approved, a development shoe may be worn by an athlete for a maximum period of 12 months starting from the date when the athlete proposes to wear the development shoe for the first time in an applicable competition. The development shoe can only be worn this 12-month period, regardless. And then we have, again, like, all these technical regulations. So this is referring to the actual carbon plate, the stack heights, and all that kind of stuff, and what you can and can't do. So it's quite an interesting thing, but nonetheless, the main thing that affects us is further down here, this availability scheme, which I guess for someone like Gustav and Kona, this is where it kind of can become, I guess, a sense unfair, but there's the argument of like fairness versus innovation, right? So availability scheme, existing shoes and new shoes must be available for purchase by any athletes participating in applicable competitions. So if Gustav's wearing them, anyone should be able to wear them. Where an athlete proposes to wear a new shoe at an applicable competition, if approved by World Athletics in accordance with these new regulations, the new shoe must be made available for purchase by the relevant sport manufacturer no later than 1 month prior to the start date of the first applicable competition at which the athlete proposes to wear the new shoe, unless otherwise agreed in writing by the Chief Executive Officer. Yeah. So again, essentially, the main thing here is that they're available to public. They're not a prototype that's only available to the athlete themselves. And, you guys can check all this stuff out for yourself. But it's an interesting discussion nonetheless. And I think that, so this is the approval process. Obviously, it needs to follow all the guidelines. It needs to be ticked off by the executive officer for World Athletics, who kind of manages all this stuff. And, all the things regarding sole thickness for development shoes. Obviously, these are all the different events, but here we're going to be referring to road running events, which is 40 millimeters. I don't know how thick the soles were in Gustav's shoes, but they looked pretty thick when he was running down at Kona. Nonetheless, guys, that's the World Athletics regulations. And like I said, it's no point going into the depth of all of that stuff. But I think the main thing is triathlon is bringing in new rules saying that all of these prototype shoes are no longer able to be worn because they need to be made available to public and they need to be made available for purchase by the public, which I think there's two sides of the equation. There's one, innovation. I think it's always great. Two, fairness. But I think that the fairness equation kind of takes over in my eyes, because at the end of the day, you can still have innovative shoes. The carbon plated shoes, they're still legal. World Athletics has still approved all the Nike Alpha Flyers, Vaporflyer, carbon plate shoes. You can still have very fast running shoes. This is not putting a halt on what's legal and what's not. But I do think that, there was probably a point in time whereby, or at least sometime after Kona, with all the kind of talk about Gustav shoes, that World Athletics or the World Triathlon Association may have thought, well, potentially there is a loophole that could be exploited here, whereby, maybe Gustav was just running in prototype shoes. Yeah, did they help him more than any other regular shoe? Maybe not. But, where does it go? What are athletes then going to look at now they kind of see the potential for innovating new shoes and rocking up in solely prototype shoes that no one's ever seen before? So let me know what you guys think. Some definitely big news for the professional field. I don't think it'll affect many age groupers, but nonetheless, that is the new shoe regulations, which mean that all athletes need to be running in regular shoes that are available for anyone to purchase. So there we go. Thanks, guys. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.